You've been through something that nearly broke you. Maybe it was an illness, a loss, a moment where the ground disappeared beneath your feet and you had to decide in real time whether you were going to keep standing or just let yourself fall. Now imagine you survived it. Imagine you made it through to the other side barely, but you made it. Your hands were shaking, your lungs were burning, and every single thing in you was screaming, rest. You've earned it. You're done. And then in the dark, when everything is finally quiet, you hear it. A sound that isn't yours. A woman crying. Not loud, not dramatic. The kind of crying people do when they think no one is listening. The kind that means something has already gone terribly, terribly wrong. What do you do? The easy answer is nothing. You're spent. You've got nothing left. Whatever is out there in that darkness is not your problem. But here's the thing about easy answers. They never tell you who you are. This is the story of Caleb Dunmore, a cowboy who should have ridden away, who had every reason, every right, every excuse to just close his eyes and let the night keep its secrets. He didn't. And what happened next, in 3 parts, across 3 days, in a canyon that seemed to swallow sound and time alike, changed him in ways he never found the right words for. I know because I was there, riding dragged behind him, keeping a log nobody asked me to keep, watching a man I thought I understood turn into someone I'm still trying to figure out. This is what I wrote down. Part 1, The Sound That Shouldn't Have Been There. Narrated by Theo Marsh, wrangler, reluctant witness, keeper of an unofficial logbook nobody asked for. Campo Verde Canyon, New Mexico Territory, late October. I keep a log. Not because anyone told me to, not because the outfit pays me extra for it. I've always had this itch in my fingers when something happens that feels like it matters. Like if I don't write it down, it'll evaporate. Like the air out here is too dry to hold memory, and you have to press things into paper before they go. Caleb used to give me grief about it. Theo, he'd say, tipping his hat back and squinting at me like I was something mildly confusing, like a backwards boot or a 2-headed coin. Nobody out here is interested in your feelings about the canyon. He wasn't wrong exactly, but I kept writing anyway. Good thing, too, because what happened those 3 days in Campo Verde, I needed every word I could find. We'd been riding hard for 11 days when the ambush hit us at the South Ridge. I won't get into the full account of it here. That's a different log, one I wrote with shaking hands and a split lip, leaning against a boulder while the echoes of rifle shots were still bouncing off the walls. What matters is that by the time it was over, we'd lost 2 horses, one good man named Pratt who didn't deserve what he got, and Caleb Dunmore had taken a bullet through the meat of his left shoulder and another graze along his ribs that left a line of raw, weeping skin like a brand. He didn't go down. That was the part that still sits strange with me. I watched that man get hit, watched him stagger, grip the saddle horn, blink once, twice, like he was recalibrating something internal, and then just keep going. Not heroic, not dramatic, more like a machine that hadn't received the signal to stop yet. We made camp that night at the canyon floor, in the shelter of an overhang that smelled of old ash and animal musk. The others, what was left of us, 3 riders including me, were asleep within the hour. Exhaustion like that isn't rest. It's more like your body just yanking the cord without asking. I sat up to write. Caleb was propped against the rock wall 6 feet from me, his shoulder wrapped in strips from his own shirt, his breathing a little ragged but steady. Every time I glanced at him, I expected to see him sleeping, and every time his eyes were open, not wide awake, not alert, but that particular half-open stillness that men develop after years of being in places where sleep could get you killed. You don't fully rest. You hover, just beneath the surface. You writing about me? He asked without moving his head. Writing about the day, I said. Same thing. You think a lot of yourself. He almost smiled, almost. Just tired Theo, not delusional. That was the last thing either of us said for about an hour. I wrote about Pratt, about the way the canyon walls had turned amber in the last light before the shooting started, about the strange beauty of the worst moments, how you always notice the sky color during a disaster, like your brain is trying to give you something decent to take with you. I was mid-sentence when Caleb's hand came up fast, fingers splayed. Stop. I stopped. He was sitting fully upright now, shoulder be damned, and his head was tilted at that listening angle, chin down, one ear turned toward the dark mouth of the canyon beyond the firelight. I held my breath, and then I heard it. A woman crying. My first instinct, I'll be honest, was to decide I hadn't heard it. This is a thing the mind does when it receives information that doesn't fit the context. It tries to edit the input, revise it into something manageable, wind through a crack in the rock, a coyote with an unusual pitch, the sound of one of our horses shifting and blowing through its nose. I ran through all of those and discarded them one by one, and was left with a woman crying somewhere out there in the dark, in a canyon that we'd confirmed held no settlements within 2 days' ride. Caleb was already moving. "Don't," I whispered. "Caleb, you've got a bullet wound. You can barely lift your left arm, whatever that is." "I can hear what it is," he said, low, final. The kind of voice that isn't interested in debate. It could be anything. It could be a trap. After today, it could absolutely be a... He looked at me then, just once, and something in his face was very quiet and very clear, and I shut my mouth. He didn't take a torch. He moved by the ambient glow of the half-moon, stepping out of the firelight with the practiced ease of a man who'd spent more nights outside than in, and I watched him cross into the dark like a stone dropped into water. No splash, just gone. I waited 30 seconds. Then I picked up my log, tucked it into my coat, and went after him. Because I am, and this is both my greatest professional flaw and my only real virtue, constitutionally incapable of not following a story when it's moving. He found her 30 yards out, in a shallow notch in the canyon wall that you'd miss entirely if you weren't looking low. She was Apache. Young, maybe 20, maybe less, it was hard to tell in that light, and she was sitting with her back against the rock and her knees drawn up and her arms wrapped around something pressed to her chest. Her face was turned sideways and her eyes were closed, and the crying was nearly silent by then, the kind that's been going on long enough to run out of sound. Just the shape of it left. The body still heaving slightly, the breath still catching. Caleb stopped 6 feet away. He didn't speak, he didn't move. He just crouched down very slowly, making himself small, and waited. I came up behind him, and he held up 2 fingers without looking at me. "Stay back, stay quiet." I stayed. I wrote everything I could in my head, saving it for later. The woman opened her eyes. She looked at Caleb, then past him at me, then back to Caleb. Whatever she was holding shifted against her chest. She tightened her arms around it. A child. Small, wrapped in a blanket that had seen better days. Breathing. I could see the rise and fall of the bundle, but very quietly, very shallowly. The way small things breathe when they're fighting something they didn't choose to fight. Caleb looked at the child for a long moment. Then he did the most disarming thing I've ever watched a man do in a tense situation. He reached into his coat pocket, slowly, 2 fingers only, showing her every motion, and pulled out a small square of hardtack wrapped in cloth. He set it on the ground between them, slid it forward a few inches, sat back. He didn't offer it, he didn't gesture toward it. He just put it there and let it exist neutrally in the space between them, like a word left on a table for someone to pick up when they're ready. She watched him for a long time. Then she looked down at the child in her arms. Then she picked up the hardtack. Her name, as best as we could work out across the language barrier over the next hour, was something that sounded like it might be rendered in English as Seku, though I was never confident in that, and I wrote it with a question mark every time. She spoke no English, and I had perhaps 40 words of Apache, acquired from a Hikaria trader I'd spent a week with the previous spring, and most of those 40 words were nouns. Useful for naming things, not useful for understanding situations. Caleb had more. He'd spent time, years back, in a stretch of territory I didn't know well. He didn't talk about it directly, but he understood her gestures and filled in words carefully, and I watched his face as he listened. The way a translator's face reflects what they're processing before they put it into words. What he gathered piecemeal over the course of that dark and careful hour. She had become separated from her band 3 days ago during a movement through the mountain passes. Not by accident. There had been soldiers. There had been a confrontation. She showed him this with her hands, 2 groups then scattered, and she had run with the child. She'd been moving since. No food since the first day. Water only from what she found in the canyon. She was not sure which direction her people had gone. The child, her daughter, I was fairly certain from the way she held her, had a fever. Had been sick for 2 days. Had been crying earlier but had stopped, which, as anyone who's spent time around sick children knows, is the thing that makes you more frightened, not less. I wrote all of this. Caleb sat with it for a moment. Then he said quietly to me, not her, she needs to come back to the fire. The others, I'll handle the others. You're a man with a bullet wound, 200 miles from. Theo, he looked at me steadily. Write it down later, help me now. He was right about the others being a problem. Jenks, the eldest of our remaining riders, a man whose opinions were as fixed and weathered as fence posts, woke up as we came back toward camp and went absolutely rigid at the sight of Seku. His hand went to his gun. Jenks, Caleb said, flat. What in the... She's got a sick child. She's alone. She's not armed. He kept walking, slow and steady, putting himself between Jenks and the woman without making it theatrical. We're not going to be the kind of men who make this a problem. Jenks's jaw worked. Caleb, I said we're not going to be that. Quieter this time, not angry, worse than angry, cert. I've been shot once today, Jenks. I don't have patience left for anything that isn't necessary. This woman and her daughter are not a problem. They're people. That's all the conversation we're having on it. Jenks stared at him for a long moment. Then he looked away, lay back down, pulled his blanket over himself. Ruiz, the third man, younger, who'd barely said anything since Pratt died, just watched. Then nodded once, small, like he was agreeing with something that had already been settled. Seku observed all of this from her position near the fire's edge, pressed close to the warmth, her daughter against her chest. I couldn't tell what she made of the exchange. Her face was careful and private in the way of someone who's learned that other people's arguments about you can go in a direction you don't control. I stoked the fire. Caleb sat down across from her and looked at the child. How bad? I asked him. He was quiet for a moment. Bad enough that morning matters if she gets through tonight, he paused. Morning matters. I opened my log to a fresh page. October 24th. Campo Verde Canyon. Clear skies. Temperature dropping. Caleb Dunmore should be unconscious from blood loss and didn't get the message. There is a child here fighting a fever by firelight. I don't know her name. I don't know if she's going to be all right. I'm going to keep writing until I do. The night went long and cold and strange. Caleb stayed awake, running on something that wasn't energy, some stubbornness deeper than energy, some bone-level refusal that I'd seen glimpses of all day and was now watching fully for the first time. He had Ruiz bring water from the canyon stream, and they boiled it over the fire, and Caleb stripped a corner of his bedroll, the cleanest part, and made a compress. He applied it to the child's forehead and showed Seku the motion and then let her take over, because she was the mother and this was her territory, and he understood that without needing it said. He sat back. His left arm was held at an angle that told me everything about the pain level, even though his face didn't. I slid my canteen toward him. He took it, drank twice, handed it back. You should sleep, I said. Probably. Your shoulder is going to feel the same whether I'm asleep or awake. A pause. Maybe worse if I lie down, let me sit. I let him sit. The fire popped. Somewhere far up the canyon, an owl called and went quiet. The child made a small sound and Seku adjusted her grip and made a sound back, low, rhythmic, a tone without words. A mother sound, something that existed before language did. Caleb watched. His expression was, I searched for the right notation and came up short. It wasn't pity. It wasn't admiration. It was more like recognition. Like he was seeing something he'd known once, from an angle he didn't usually let himself revisit. I wrote that down, verbatim the feeling of it. Around 3 in the morning, the child's fever broke. Not dramatically. No crisis reversal. Just a long, quiet hour of Seku applying the compress and rocking and making her sounds, and then, slowly, the child's breathing deepened. Evened out. Lost the shallow flutter that had kept my own chest tight without my realizing it. Seku pressed her forehead against her daughter's head. Her eyes closed. Something in her shoulders, the last held thing, the thing she'd been carrying since 3 days ago in those mountain passes, finally let go. Caleb watched this happen and said absolutely nothing. I didn't write anything either. Some things you just let exist. When I finally picked up the pen again, the only thing I put down was 4:11 a.m. Child is sleeping. Seku is sleeping. Caleb has finally closed his eyes. First time all day. I'm going to let this one breathe. Morning came gray and cold, the light arriving late the way it does when the canyon walls are high enough to argue with the sun. I was the first one fully awake. That's a habit I've had since boyhood, this inability to stay asleep past the moment the dark starts thinning. My father used to say it was a character flaw. I've come around to thinking it's a superpower. You see things in the early morning hour that the world puts away before the fully rested can catch them. What I saw that morning. Ruiz had moved his bedroll during the night. Not much, maybe 3 feet, just enough to be between the canyon's open mouth and where Seku and the child slept. He was still asleep himself, and I don't know if he'd done it consciously, but he'd done it. Jenks was awake, sitting with his back to all of us, staring at the canyon wall. His jaw was working the way it did when he was chewing something that wasn't food. Caleb was not asleep. His eyes were closed, but his breathing was the wrong kind, too controlled. The kind you do when you're managing pain and pretending to rest so that people will stop watching you. The child was awake. She was sitting upright in Seku's arms, and her eyes were open and dark and observant, taking in the camp with the calm attention of a small creature who has just survived something and isn't sure yet what to make of the world that's on the other side of it. She looked at the fire. She looked at Ruiz. She looked at me. I waved small idiotic. She stared at me for a moment. Then she made a face at me, not hostile, just considering, and looked away, apparently finding me unremarkable. I took a full breath for the first time since we'd found her mother. The problem announced itself with Jenks the way problems usually did, directly, without much ceremony. He waited until Caleb was sitting up and had accepted his morning share of what passed for coffee, black, bitter, the consistency of river water that had made choices. And then he came around and crouched in front of him with the posture of a man who had decided something overnight. "I've been thinking," Jenks said. "Tell me," Caleb said, neutral. "We've got a 3-day ride back to Delano. 2 horses short, 3 men, one of them wounded. We are running short on provisions." He paused. "We cannot take on responsibility for 2 extra individuals who are not party to this outfit." Caleb looked at him over the tin cup. "I hear you." "Good. Then you understand that we need to." "I hear you," Caleb said again with that careful emphasis that means, "I understand the argument, not I agree with the conclusion." "I do, and you're right about the math. We are stretched." Jenks nodded, something relaxing in his posture. "But," Caleb said, "leaving them is not what we're going to do." Jenks went rigid again. "Caleb." "Her daughter was sick last night, Jenks, is still recovering. She is 4 days out from her people with no provisions in a territory she may not know as well as she knows her own. We ride out and leave her here, we may as well." He stopped. "I won't do it." "You may not have the choice. Your shoulder." "My shoulder is my concern. You lost blood, a lot of it. By my eye, you are not well enough to make decisions that." "Then it's a good thing," Caleb said very gently, very finally, "that it's not your shoulder." Jenks stared at him. There was a silence between them that had weight to it, not just the current disagreement, but years of riding together and not quite agreeing, years of Jenks's hard pragmatism and Caleb's harder something else that I'd never found a clean word for. Decency seemed too soft. Stubbornness was closer but didn't catch the moral dimension of it. Seku watched the exchange from across the fire. She couldn't understand the words, but there was nothing wrong with her ability to read tension, and her arms tightened slightly around her daughter. Caleb noticed, he glanced at her. Something in his face went deliberate. He relaxed his own posture consciously, making himself less angular. "A message for her, not about you. We're all right." She didn't fully relax, but she watched him with something that might have been reassessment. "One day," Jenks said finally. "We give this 1 day, try to locate her people or find her a route, and then we move." Caleb looked at him for a moment, then nodded. 1 day. Jenks stood, walked away, and did not look at Seku as he passed her, which was, I supposed, the best we were going to get from him. I wrote, "Jenks made a concession this morning. This may be the most remarkable event of the entire expedition." The day's work, such as it was, fell naturally to Caleb and me, which said something about Ruiz's instinctive sense of what mattered and Jenks's instinctive sense of what he didn't want to be part of. The task, figure out where Seku's band had gone. This was harder than it sounds. Not because the canyon didn't have signs. It did, plenty of them, the kind you learn to read over years of time in the territory. But because those signs were 3 or 4 days old, and because we were working across a language gap with someone who was still exhausted and still managing a recovering child and still deciding, I think, how much to trust us. Trust was the currency of the whole operation. Caleb seemed to understand this in a way I was actively learning. He didn't push. He didn't ask direct questions and then wait, obviously, for answers. He just worked, moved slowly around the camp's edges, reading the ground, occasionally pointing at something, a track, a scrape on the rock, a direction, and looking at Seku, and letting her confirm or deny with a gesture or a shift of her expression. She was sharp, sharper than the situation should have allowed. Despite the exhaustion, despite the toll of the last 4 days, her attention was complete and precise, and she corrected him twice with small gestures, no, not that way, this way, that he received without ego and recalibrated around. I trailed them and wrote. Her daughter, whose name, through a long, careful exchange of sounds and gestures, I eventually understood to be something close to Yara, had recovered enough by mid-morning to be curious. She toddled at her mother's heels, gripping the edge of Seku's skirt, and examined things. Rocks, the marks Caleb made in the dirt when he was sketching a rough map, the buttons on my coat when I crouched too close to her. She grabbed one of my buttons. I let her. She studied it with the focused intensity of a very small scientist, turned it, tried to put it in her mouth, reconsidered, put it back. Ruiz, passing behind me, laughed, short and genuine, and then made a face like he hadn't meant to. I wrote that down. By midday, we had something close to a direction. Caleb laid it out plainly. The signs suggested her band had moved northwest, toward a series of passes he knew from a previous season. If they'd made the decision to go that way, and Seku's face when he pointed it out suggested strongly that, yes, that was their way, they'd be at a water source about a day and a half's travel from where we currently were. She can make that, Caleb said to me quietly aside. If we give her what provisions we can spare and she leaves tomorrow at first light. And us. We push hard, make Delano in 2 days instead of 3. On your shoulder. He looked at me sideways. I'm not questioning your toughness, I said. I'm noting the medical reality. Noted, he paused. Can you ride drag and handle my responsibilities if I start to lose ground? I had never handled the drag position. I had also never claimed to be anything other than a rider with a horse. Yes, I said. You sure? No, but yes. He gave me the almost smile again. Fair enough. What happened next was not in any plan. In the early afternoon, while Caleb was resting his shoulder and I was refilling canteens at the canyon stream, Jenks found something. He called us over without theatrics, just a sharp, flat whistle that brought all 3 of us up short. And when we came, he was standing near the mouth of a narrow side channel, looking down. Tracks, several sets, shod horses, 2 days old, maybe less. Not Apache tracks, rider tracks. Soldiers, Ruiz said. Or hunters, Jenks said. Either way. Caleb studied the tracks for a long time. His expression did a thing I'd only seen it do once or twice, not fear, but calculation that felt like fear because the stakes were real and the math was not looking good. If there were riders in this canyon, soldiers following the same band Seku had been separated from, and they found us with her. The math of that situation had several possible outcomes. None of them were comfortable. He turned and walked back to camp without explaining, which meant he was working through something that needed space. I knew better than to follow immediately. I wrote down the track description instead. Documented size, depth, interval, direction. When I came back to camp, Caleb was sitting with Seku. He was using his hands and his 40 better words than mine of Apache and a patch of ground as a map, and he was explaining something to her. I watched her face as he talked. She was very still, the kind of stillness that isn't peace. It's the stillness of someone receiving information that is dangerous and familiar at the same time. She'd known this was possible. She'd been carrying the knowledge of it for days. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked him something. He listened, answered. She asked again, shorter, more pointed. He looked at the ground, then back at her, answered again. She considered this for a moment. Then she made a decision. I could see it happen the precise moment it settled into her body, and she looked directly at him with an expression I am still not sure how to accurately describe. It wasn't gratitude, not exactly. It wasn't challenge. It was something that occupied the space between them, an acknowledgement, person to person, of what was real and what was being offered in the face of it. She said one word. Caleb nodded once. What did she ask? I said quietly when I came to sit beside him later. He was quiet for a moment. She asked if I was going to let her go before they found us. I felt that land. And I told her no. And the second time, she asked again. She asked why not. I waited. And I told her. He stopped. Scratched at the edge of the bandage on his shoulder, an unconscious gesture that meant he was working past something. I told her I didn't have a good reason that would translate, so I'd just have to show her. I wrote all of it down. He told her he'd have to show her. I've never admired a sentence more, and I have read a great many sentences in my life. That night we did not sleep well. The tracks were an ambient dread that the darkness made worse. Every sound the canyon amplified and threw back at us at odd angles, an echo structure that made it impossible to locate anything acoustically. A rock shift 300 yards away sounded like it was 10 feet to your left. Caleb sat up again. Of course he did. This time Seku sat up with him. Not next to him, she maintained a careful, culturally appropriate distance, but awake and present and across the fire from him. Yara slept between them both, wrapped in both their blankets, which was practically speaking warmer and logistically speaking not something any of us commented on. They didn't speak much. There wasn't much they could say. But at one point, I was half awake, watching through mostly closed eyes, not willing to announce that I was aware. Caleb reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. Metal. He turned it in his fingers once or twice in the firelight. A pocket watch. He opened it, looked at it, not checking the time, something else, the way you look at a photograph. Seku watched him. After a moment he reached over slowly, same as always, showing every movement, and held it out toward her. She took it carefully, looked at it. On the inside of the lid, I knew, though I'd never been shown, I'd once caught a glimpse when he hadn't realized I was near. There was a photograph. Small, worn. She looked at it for a moment, then looked at him. He said something quiet, Apache, not many words. She looked back at the watch, then at Yara sleeping. She closed the watch gently and held it out to him. He took it back, put it in his pocket. Neither of them said anything else. I didn't write about the watch that night. Some things I document for the record, some things I leave where they fall. The riders found us at first light on the third day. Not soldiers. That was the first thing we established, and the establishing of it released about 40% of the tension from Caleb's posture in real time, which told me how much he'd been carrying it. Civilians, 3 of them, cutting through the canyon as a shortcut toward a settlement to the north. They'd been in the territory 3 months and had that look, not seasoned, not naive, but in the uncertain middle where a person is starting to understand that the thing they thought they were doing and the thing they are actually doing are somewhat different animals. They saw Seku. There was a moment. Caleb stood up. Not theatrically, not with his hand near his gun. He just stood, his full height, which was considerable, his shoulder wrapped, his expression carrying the unmistakable quality of a man who has already done his deciding and is not interested in redoing it, and he looked at them. "Morning," he said. "Morning," said the lead writer after a pause. "You're passing through." "That's right." "Good morning to do it." He reached for his coffee. "You're welcome to water your horses at the stream before you go." Another pause, longer this time. "Much obliged," said the writer. They watered their horses. They moved on. Not one of them spoke to or about Seku in any way that required a response. When they were gone, Ruiz exhaled audibly. Jenks, to my lasting astonishment, said, "Handled." That was all, but from Jenks it was a volume. We had agreed the night before. We would take Seku and Yara as far as the canyon's northwest mouth, which would put her within half a day's travel of the passes and the water source and hopefully her people. It added hours to our ride in the wrong direction. Nobody mentioned this, not even Jenks. We broke camp with the efficiency of people who have been traveling together long enough that the division of tasks is invisible. Everybody knows their part, everybody does it, and the whole thing assembles itself without a director. Ruiz packed and loaded. Jenks scouted the first quarter mile and came back with a clear report. I managed the canteens and the remaining provisions, and divided out a portion for Seku that was, if I'm being factual, somewhat more than strictly even, and pretended I hadn't done this on purpose. Caleb helped Seku onto the spare horse, what had been Pratt's horse, which none of us had fully figured out what to do about emotionally, with the same careful give-her-every-movement approach, and Yara was settled in front of her, and they went. I rode behind them for the first hour, which put me in position to see things the others didn't. Yara, restored now, was a different creature from the child I'd met by firelight 2 nights ago. She was still watchful, still serious in the way of children who have absorbed some adult seriousness before they should have, but there was a liveliness starting to come back, small sparks of it. She kept turning her head to look at things, a hawk circling, a reddish rock formation, the way the morning light was coming down in long shafts through the canyon walls. At one point, she turned all the way around in the saddle to look at me. I made the same face I'd made before. She made a different face back at me this time, more complicated. More, I don't want to overstate this, she was very young but more like a joke, like she was trying something out. I made a worse face. She looked away very quickly, and I would swear on my log that the corner of her mouth was doing something. I wrote it down. We reached the canyon's northwest mouth at mid-morning. It opened out into a broader valley, the kind of landscape that feels like a held breath finally released, suddenly wide, suddenly light, the canyon walls pulling back and the sky arriving all at once overhead like something that had been waiting. Caleb stopped his horse. We all stopped. He turned to Seku and began the process, gesture and the words he had, her face and her gestures in return of confirming. From here, you know the way. From here, you know where to go. She looked at the landscape for a moment. Really looked at it, the way people look when they're not just seeing but orienting, finding the particular arrangement of ridges and slopes and sky that means. Yes, I know this. I know where I am. She said something. He nodded. She looked at the horizon for another moment, then at Yara, adjusted her daughter's position in front of her. Then she looked at Caleb. She spoke for a while. More words than she'd offered at one time before, a longer sentence or two, careful, specific, with pauses where she was choosing between options. Her face was very even and very direct. Caleb listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said something short in return. She made a small sound that I am classifying in my official log as acknowledgement. Then she touched her heels to the horse and rode. She didn't look back. Yara did. She turned around in the saddle, all the way around, craning ungainly the way small children do things with their whole body, and looked at us. Then she raised one hand. Small, deliberate, the gesture of someone who has watched adults use it and decided to try. Ruiz raised his hand back, then looked at the ground. I raised mine. Jenks slowly, incrementally, like the movement was happening without his permission, raised his. Caleb's left arm was still bound. His right hand was resting on the saddle horn. He lifted 2 fingers. That was all. And then they were into the valley, moving northwest, and the canyon's shadow didn't reach that far, and the morning light took them in whole. We rode back the long way in silence. Not an uncomfortable silence. The kind that is weight without pressure. The kind that accumulates when something has happened, and everyone's in the middle of understanding what. I rode alongside Caleb. He was moving a little slower than before, which he would never have admitted was about pain, and I chose not to mention it, which was the most useful thing I could do. After a while I said, "What did she say to you at the end?" He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer. She said, he paused, reconfigured. Something like she didn't know the word for what we'd done. In her language, the word for that would have to do with debt, and it would follow her family, and she didn't want that. I considered this. So she said she was giving us something else instead. What? He thought about it. I think she said she was giving us her attention, the fact that she had seen us, that she would know us. Another pause. I don't think I translated it perfectly, but something like we existed to her now in a way that mattered, and she would carry that, and so would the girl. I rode with that for a while. Then I opened my log. October 26th, canyon mouth clear, cold still. She gave us her attention. She said she would know us. I've been paid in a lot of currencies across a lot of territories. Money, whiskey, the occasional honest thank you. I keep coming back to the idea that being known, being actually seen and remembered by someone who had every reason to look away from you, might be the rarest form of it. Caleb hasn't said anything in 20 minutes. I think he's thinking the same thing differently. His shoulder is hurting him. He'll admit that to nobody. I'll keep track instead. We made Delano in 2 days, like he said. He was worse by the end of it, fever starting, from the wound, which had been inevitable from the moment he declined to rest. And the doctor, they had their used words I won't reproduce here because they were frightening, and spent 3 days frightening us before the thing turned, and Caleb started coming back the correct direction. Jenks sat with him the first night. I didn't find out until later. Jenks didn't say anything about it, neither did Caleb. But when I came in the early morning, that early morning habit again, Jenks was there, sitting in the chair beside the bed, not quite asleep, hat on his knee, jaw working that way it did. I sat down on the other side. We didn't speak. Ruiz came in an hour later. He had apparently had the same idea independently, because he looked as surprised to see us as we were to see him. Then he just pulled up another chair. Caleb was up and walking, carefully, stiffly, like a man negotiating terms with his own body by the end of the first week. The first thing he did, when he could be on his feet for more than a few minutes, was to go outside and look northwest. Just stand there for a moment. I didn't follow him out. I watched from the doorway. He stood there for a while, then he came back in. I thought about asking, didn't. Some things don't improve with explanation. I have been writing this log for 3 weeks now, adding to it and revising it, and occasionally setting it down and picking it up again days later when a detail comes back to me that I didn't get right the first time. There are things I can't quite capture. The quality of the canyon at night, that specific darkness, that specific cold, the way sound moved through it and the way silence moved through it differently. The exact register of Yara's face in the firelight when she was sick, and then when she was not. The watch open in Caleb's hand, the photograph I am still not sure I ever actually saw. What Seku said, the original words which Caleb heard and I did not. The concept in her language that meant, not debt, something else, attention, being known. There's a case to be made that some things aren't meant to be fully documented. That the act of pinning a thing down on paper is also the act of killing part of it. The part that lives in the space between the event and the person, the part that only exists in transit. I've made that argument to myself several times across the past 3 weeks. Then I pick up the pen anyway. Because the other case, the one I keep coming back to, is that someone should bear witness. Not to make the thing larger than it was, not to clean it up or make it neat or put a frame around it that makes it comfortable. Just to say this happened. These people were here. This is what they did and how they looked and what it cost them and what they found on the other side of it. Caleb Dunmore got shot once and nearly died twice, and both times he kept going in a direction that was not the safe one, and I will never be able to tell you exactly why, because when I asked him, all he gave me was that look, and that was not something I could put in a log. Seku carried her daughter through 4 days of nothing, no food, no certainty, no safe ground, and kept her alive. And I will never know the full dimensions of that, what it took, what it cost, what she called upon that I have no name for. Yara raised her hand. Small, deliberate. The gesture of someone who has decided to try. I keep coming back to that morning at the canyon mouth, the way the light came down, the way the valley opened. The way she didn't look back, because looking back wasn't what she needed to do. And the way Yara did all the way around in the saddle, ungainly, using her whole body, the way children do when they haven't yet learned the adult efficiency of partial gestures. She turned and she looked at us, and she raised her hand. And we raised ours back. I don't know what happened to them after that. I don't know if they found the band at the water source. I don't know what Seku said to her people about the 3 days she'd been gone, or whether she said anything at all. I don't know if she remembered us. I think she did. I think she meant what she said. But I'll tell you what I know for certain. I know a man who should have been out of danger, who heard a sound in the darkness that wasn't his and went toward it anyway. I know what it cost him, and I know what it cost the people around him, and I know that none of them, not Ruiz, not even Jenks, not me, would have told you afterward that it was the wrong call.